Stop this funeral. Right now. That woman is alive. Security. Get this maniac out of here. I'm not leaving. And neither is she. Not in that box. What you're about to hear is not fiction. It happened in Cincinnati, March 2023. And it started with a lie so perfect, even death certificates couldn't expose it. Grace Johnson was about to be buried alive. And the only person who knew was a man the world had forgotten. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because this story, it doesn't start at a funeral. It starts 3 days earlier. In a mansion, with a glass of wine. Before we go any further, if stories about betrayal, survival, and justice fascinate you, hit subscribe. This channel uncovers the darkest true stories most people will never hear. And trust me, you'll want to see what happens next. Grace Johnson didn't drink that night. She almost did. Peter, her husband, poured it himself, smiled, handed it to her with the kind of affection that comes easy after 15 years of marriage. She set it down, said she'd drink it later. Peter's smile didn't waver, but his jaw tightened, just slightly. Grace didn't notice. She was looking at her phone. Her company, Vantage Tech, had just closed a deal worth $200 million. She was distracted, excited. Peter watched her. Then he watched the glass. And he waited. 20 minutes later, Grace picked it up. She drank half. Within an hour, her hands started tingling. Within 2, she couldn't feel her legs. By morning, her heartbeat had slowed to 4 beats per minute. The family doctor, Michael, arrived at 6 a.m. He didn't call 911. He checked her pulse, looked at Peter, and said the words Peter had paid him to say. She's gone. Grace Johnson was declared dead at 6:43 a.m. But here's the thing. She wasn't. Her mind was screaming. Her body was a prison. And the poison in her veins? It had a name. Tetrodotoxin. The same toxin found in pufferfish. The same one used in Haitian folklore to create zombies. It doesn't kill you. It makes you look dead. Heart rate drops. Breathing becomes undetectable. Your pupils stop responding to light. To everyone around you, you're gone. But inside, you're fully conscious. You hear everything, feel everything, and you can't move, can't scream, can't blink. You're trapped in your own corpse. Grace heard Michael tell Peter she was dead. She heard Peter cry, heard him call her family, heard him arrange the funeral. And through it all, she was screaming. No one heard. Now, you're probably wondering, how does someone even get tetrodotoxin? Good question. Because it's not something you order off Amazon. Peter Johnson had been planning this for 11 months. He'd contacted a black market chemist in Singapore, paid $30,000, had it shipped in a cosmetic powder container labeled face cream. He'd researched dosages, studied cases, learned exactly how much would paralyze without killing. Because here's what Peter understood. If Grace died of poison, there'd be an autopsy. But if she died of natural causes, if the family doctor signed off, no investigation, no questions, just a funeral and a fortune. Grace's company was worth $1.2 billion. Her personal assets? Another $300 million. Peter wasn't in the will. Not directly. But as her widower, he'd inherit everything. He just needed her in the ground before anyone asked questions. The funeral was set for 3 days later. Fast, but not suspiciously fast. She would have wanted it simple, Peter told the family. No fuss. Her Aunt Helen protested, said it felt rushed. Peter squeezed her hand, looked her in the eyes. I just want to let her rest. Helen didn't argue after that. And so, on a gray Thursday morning, 200 people gathered at Greenwood Cemetery. The casket was mahogany. Expensive. Closed. Peter had insisted on that too. I want people to remember her as she was, he'd said. Not like this. No one questioned it. Grace's driver, David, stood in the back. He wasn't crying. He was staring at Peter. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. David had driven Grace for 7 years. He knew her routines, her habits. She'd seemed fine the night before she died. Energetic, even. And then, suddenly dead? David didn't buy it. But he also didn't have proof. So he stood there, watching, waiting. The pastor began speaking. Words about legacy, about loss, about a life well lived. Grace heard every word. She was 6 feet away, inside the box. Her mind was still sharp. The tetrodotoxin was wearing off. Slowly, too slowly. She could feel her fingers now. Barely. But she couldn't move them. Not yet. The pastor finished. Peter stepped forward. He placed a hand on the casket. And then, in a voice that broke just right, he said, Goodbye, my love. The crowd murmured. Some wept. And that's when the cemetery gate crashed open. A man sprinted through. Dirty jacket. Unshaven. Wild eyes. Micah, stop this funeral. People turned. Gasped. Security started moving toward him. But Micah didn't stop. He ran straight to the casket. Put both hands on it. That woman is alive. Peter's face went white. Then red. Get him out of here. But Micah didn't move. He looked at the crowd. At the pastor. At Aunt Helen. Grace Johnson was poisoned. She's paralyzed. Not dead. If you bury her, you're killing her. Silence. Helen stepped forward. Who are you? My name is Micah. I work here. At the cemetery. And 2 days ago, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. He pointed at Peter. Him. On the phone. Talking about timing. About making sure the window closed before anyone could check. Peter laughed. It sounded hollow. This is insane. This man is clearly. I have the vial. Micah reached into his jacket. Pulled out a small glass bottle. Empty. But labeled. I found this in the trash behind your estate. Yesterday. I went there because I wanted to be sure before I did this. The crowd was silent now. Peter's lawyer stepped forward. You're trespassing. You're disrupting a private service. And you're making slanderous accusations. Then open the casket. Micah's voice was steady. If I'm wrong, I'll leave. I'll turn myself in. But if I'm right, and I am, then you're about to bury a woman who can still be saved. Helen looked at Peter. Peter looked at the lawyer. And the lawyer looked at the casket. We're not. Open it. That was David. Grace's driver. He'd moved to the front of the crowd now. I've been driving Mrs. Johnson for 7 years. And I'm telling you, something isn't right here. Open the casket. Peter's jaw clenched. This is a disgrace. Do it. Helen's voice cracked. But it was firm. If there's even a chance he's telling the truth, we open it. Now. The pastor hesitated. Then nodded. 2 attendants stepped forward. Unlocked the clasps. Peter tried to move toward them. David blocked him. Stay there. The lid lifted. And Grace Johnson's eyes were open. The scream came from Helen. Not because Grace was dead. Because she was staring. Her eyes were open. Glassy. Unblinking. But open. Someone in the crowd fainted. Micah shoved past the attendants. Knelt beside the casket. She's still under. We don't have much time. He pulled a second vial from his pocket. This one full. Clear liquid. This is the antidote. Atropine. It counters the paralysis. But I need to administer it now. Peter lunged forward. Don't you dare touch her. David grabbed him. Slammed him back. Let him work. Micah tilted Grace's head. Pried her lips apart. 3 drops under her tongue. Then he pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Counting. Come on. Come on. 10 seconds. 20. Grace's finger twitched. Helen gasped. 30 seconds. Grace's chest rose. A shallow breath. Then another. And then, she coughed. A wet, choking sound. Her hand spasmed. Her eyes blinked. And she screamed. A raw, guttural sound. The sound of someone clawing their way back from hell. The crowd erupted. Voices overlapping. Chaos. Micah helped her sit up. She was shaking. Gasping. Her eyes locked on Peter. And the look on her face. Pure recognition. Pure rage. Peter ran. David tackled him before he made it 10 feet. Police arrived 6 minutes later. By then, Grace was sitting up. Aunt Helen was holding her. She still couldn't speak clearly. Her tongue was numb, her throat raw, but she could nod. And when the officer asked, Do you know who did this to you? She pointed. Right at Peter. Michael, the family doctor, tried to leave quietly. David stopped him too. Where do you think you're going, Doc? Michael stammered. Said he had another appointment. That this was all a misunderstanding. Grace shook her head. Slowly. Deliberately. And Michael's face crumbled. They arrested both of them on the spot. Attempted murder. Conspiracy. Medical malpractice. Peter didn't say a word. Just stared at Grace as they cuffed him. Michael sobbed. Tried to explain. Said Peter had threatened him. Paid him. Promised him immunity. No one cared. Grace was taken to the hospital. Micah went with her. Not because she asked. Because Helen insisted. You saved her life, Helen said. You're not going anywhere. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what Micah already knew. Tetrodotoxin poisoning. Sublethal dose. Designed to mimic death. Another hour, the attending physician said, and she would have suffocated. Even with the paralysis wearing off, the oxygen deprivation in a sealed casket. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Grace spent 2 days in the ICU. When she finally spoke, really spoke. Her first words were, "Where's Micah?" They brought him in. He looked uncomfortable, out of place in the sterile white room. Grace stared at him. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why did you do it? You didn't know me. You had no reason to believe me. You risked everything." Micah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "7 years ago, I lost my daughter." Grace's expression softened. She drowned. I was supposed to be watching her. I wasn't. I was on my phone, taking a work call. His voice didn't waver, but his hands clenched. After that, my wife left. I lost my job, lost everything, ended up on the streets. He looked at Grace. "I've spent 7 years wishing I could go back, wishing I could save her." He paused. "I couldn't save her, but I could save you." Silence. Then Grace reached out, took his hand. "Thank you." 2 words, but the weight behind them. Micah nodded, said nothing. But for the first time in 7 years, he didn't look broken. The trial began 4 months later. It was everywhere. Front page, cable news, podcasts. The woman buried alive. Peter's defense was predictable. He claimed Micah had poisoned Grace and framed him. That Micah was a disgruntled ex-employee with a grudge. The prosecution tore it apart. They had the vial Micah found. Peter's fingerprints were on it. They had Peter's financial records. The $30,000 wire transfer to Singapore. They had phone records. Calls between Peter and Michael. Dozens of them. And they had testimony. From David, who'd seen Peter pouring Grace's wine that night. From Helen, who said Peter had rushed the funeral. From Grace herself. She took the stand on day 6. Walked to the witness box. Sat down. Looked directly at Peter. And told the jury everything. How she'd felt the tingling. The numbness. How she'd heard Michael declare her dead. How she'd been awake, fully awake, inside the casket. "I heard the nails go in," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "I heard my husband cry. I heard him tell people how much he'd miss me." She paused. "And I heard him laugh. After everyone left the room. He laughed. The courtroom was silent. I was in hell. And the man I trusted most put me there." Peter stared at the table. Didn't look up. Michael took a plea deal. Testified against Peter. Said Peter had threatened his family. Offered him $2 million. Promised no one would ever know. "I didn't want to do it," Michael said. "But I was scared. And I was greedy." He looked at Grace. "I'm sorry." Grace didn't respond. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Peter was sentenced to life without parole. Michael got 25 years. Grace stood outside the courthouse afterward. Micah beside her. Reporters swarmed. "Grace, how do you feel? What's next for you? Are you going back to Vantage Tech?" She didn't answer any of them. She just looked at Micah and said, "I'm going to live." 6 months after the trial, Grace did something no one expected. She stepped down as CEO. Not permanently, but temporarily. "I need time," she told the board. "I need to figure out who I am outside of this company." They didn't argue. Micah, meanwhile, had been offered everything. Book deals, interviews, movie rights. He turned them all down. "I didn't do it for attention," he said. Grace offered him a job. Executive consultant. 7-figure salary. He refused that too. "I don't belong in boardrooms," he said. So Grace made him something else. A partner. Not in business. In recovery. They started meeting once a week. Coffee. Walks. Quiet conversations. Grace talked about the fear. The helplessness. Micah talked about his daughter. His guilt. They didn't fix each other, but they understood each other. And sometimes, that's enough. Grace also started a foundation. The Second Chance Initiative. It funded housing for the homeless. Job training. Mental health services. Micah helped run it. He knew that world. He'd lived it. And he knew how to reach people no one else could. Within a year, they'd helped over 2,000 people. And Micah met someone. Her name was Elena Hayes. She was a counselor at one of the Second Chance centers. She'd lost her brother to an overdose. Spent years trying to forgive herself for not seeing the signs. She and Micah understood each other in the same quiet way he and Grace did. They started dating. Slowly. Carefully. A year later, they were married. Grace was at the wedding, standing beside Micah as he said his vows. And when Elena kissed him, Grace cried. Not from sadness. From relief. Because for the first time since that funeral, she believed in something again. Not love, necessarily, but goodness. Grace met someone too. His name was Jonathan Reeves. He ran a nonprofit that built schools in underserved communities. They met at a fundraiser. Talked for 3 hours. He didn't know who she was. Didn't know about the poison, the trial, the headlines. He just knew she was smart, funny, kind. And when he finally Googled her later that night, he called her anyway. I don't care what happened to you, he said. I care who you are now. They dated for 2 years. Then he proposed. Grace said yes. At the wedding, Micah gave a speech. I'm not good at this, he said. Public speaking. Sentiment. People laughed. But I'll say this. He looked at Grace. Grace Johnson taught me something I'd forgotten. He paused. That the worst thing that ever happens to you doesn't have to be the last thing. His voice cracked. She could have stayed angry, could have stayed afraid. But she didn't. He smiled. She chose to live. Really live. He raised his glass. To Grace. And to second chances. The crowd echoed. To second chances. Grace and Jonathan had 2 kids. A boy and a girl. They named the girl Hope. Micah and Elena had a son. They named him Samuel. After Micah's daughter. Because grief doesn't disappear. But it can share space with joy. Grace never went back to Vantage Tech full-time. She stayed on the board. Consulted occasionally. But her real work was the foundation. By the time she turned 55, it had helped over 50,000 people. Micah ran the day-to-day operations. And every year, on the anniversary of the funeral, they met. Just the 2 of them. At Greenwood Cemetery. At the plot where Grace was supposed to be buried. They didn't talk much. They just stood there, remembering. One year, Grace brought flowers. Laid them on the empty ground. Micah asked why. For the version of me that almost died here, she said. She looked at him. And for the version of you that saved me. Micah didn't respond. But he placed his hand on her shoulder. And they stood there. 2 people who'd been through hell. And came out on the other side. Not unscathed. But alive. Peter died in prison. Heart attack. No one attended the funeral. Michael was released after 18 years. He sent Grace a letter. She never opened it. Some apologies don't deserve an audience. Grace lived to be 83. She died in her sleep. Surrounded by family. Jonathan. Her kids. Her grandkids. And Micah. He'd flown in from Seattle, where he and Elena had retired. He held her hand as she took her last breath. And when she was gone, he whispered, "Thank you. Not for saving him, but for letting him save her." At her funeral, a real one this time, Micah didn't speak. He just stood in the back, watching. And when they lowered the casket, he didn't cry. He smiled. Because Grace Johnson had lived. Really, truly lived. And in the end, that was all that mattered. This story isn't just about survival. It's about what comes after. The world almost buried Grace Johnson. But she refused to stay down. And the man who saved her? He was supposed to be invisible, forgotten. But he became the most important person in her life. Not because of romance. Not because of wealth. But because when it mattered most, he showed up. That's the lesson here. It's not about being powerful. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. About seeing someone who needs help. And choosing to act. Even when it's hard. Even when no one's watching. Because the truth is, we all have a chance to save someone. Maybe not from a casket, but from despair. From loneliness. From giving up. And sometimes, in saving them, we save ourselves. If this story moved you, subscribe. Share it. Because stories like this remind us what we're capable of. And trust me, there are more coming. Grace Johnson was buried alive. But she didn't die there. She lived. And that makes all the difference.